on the spinal cord?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you tell the front? Big crack, right? Somebody's going to put big crack on the test. What's going to happen? Okay, so I've got my columns, I've got my horns, right? Okay, so what I have here is a sensory neuron. Looks like this is probably supposed to represent free nerve endings, maybe some Mesner's corpuscles in the skin. Right. So they're detecting sensory perception in the skin, changes in stimulus. They're going to fire off an action potential, and it's going to head in on the
motor. No.
That's the sensory root.
So this is a sensory root, which we would call the posterior dorsal root. Yeah, and what we notice is structurally, what kind of neuron is the sensory neuron? Structural. So is
bipolar? Or unipolar? Unipolar?
Which one?
Unipolar.
Unipolar. And because it's unipolar, I've got the sensory neurons are unipolar. Yeah, we're answering some pre-lab questions. Sensory neurons are unipolar. All right, remember, bipolar is only special senses. So if you're not looking at an eye, an ear, right, nose, it's not going to be bipolar. That's going to be very unusual for you to see bipolar in anything other than special senses. I can tell it's unipolar because I can see the cell body stuck off on the side. Yeah. And that's the reason why you have that fat sensory root. And for those of you that have the white spinal cord models, in addition to the big crack, the fissure, you can also tell front from back because sensory information always comes in the back. That posterior dorsal root ganglion is where those cell bodies are hanging out. So the back is always going to be fat. Okay. Everybody's writing back fat now. Okay. Sensory neuron's going to come in. Describe the horn for me. Right? Posterior, gray horn. Good. Excellent. Here's my axon. It's going to synapse with a what?
Is that an interneuron?
Interneuron. What's the structure of the interneuron? Multipolar. Can you tell? Okay. On the model, you can see? Yeah. All interneurons are multipolar. Okay. Very, very short. It's going to synapse with a motor neuron. Where's the cell body of the motor neuron?
In the horn.
In the horn, right? Describe specifically where it's at. Anterior horn, right? On this model, it would be on the right anterior horn. Okay, so that's the cell body of my motor neuron. Structurally, what is the motor neuron?
Multipolar.
Multipolar. Can you see it on the model?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So my motor neuron's going to head out my
motor ganglia root. Anterior root.
Anterior ventral root. Anterior ventral root.
Okay.
Anterior ventral is like the same.
I know.
That's just wrong.
I know. Anterior ventral root.
The motor neuron, that's in the root, the ventral right here you're talking about? Or that's the
This is the motor root. This is the anterior ventral. It's only got motor neurons in it.
Okay.
It's better to call it anterior ventral. That's the correct terminology. It's kind of sloppy to say sensory root, motor root. Right? It's telling you what's the type of signal that's traveling through it, but that's not the name of it. And you don't have to say posterior dorsal. You could say dorsal root. You could say ventral root.
Okay.
You could say posterior root. You could say anterior root. I say both because different people use different. I've just been saying both for so long. Okay. It's ridiculous. But yeah, they are redundant. It means the same thing. I won't count off if you don't use both, for sure. Once I've got both of them together, what structure am I in now? Mixed spinal nerve. Perfect. And it's mixed because I've got sensory coming in, motor going out. I'm heading off to my effector, which in this case is what? What kind of muscle?
Skeletal muscle.
Skeletal muscle. So that means that this is describing a somatic reflex. It's somatic if it's going to move your body. It's somatic if it's skeletal muscle. What other kind of reflexes could you have?
Stretch.
That's moving your body. Right? So that would still be part of the somatic reflex arc. If it's not somatic, it has to be autonomic. Right? So autonomic reflexes would be things like sneezing, coughing, vomiting, gagging, crying. Right? Eye twitching. That's still a somatic because that's still a skeletal muscle. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but most of them are. Okay. So guys, you have two different nervous systems. You have the somatic and you have the autonomic. And the wires are totally different. The neurons are totally different. Just like you don't wire your dryer on the same circuit that you wire your refrigerator on, the wires are different. You can tell. These are the wires for this room. These are the wires for this room. Same thing in your body. Otherwise your brain would go nuts. If your brain is nuts, that's probably not why. Okay? Everything's wired differently. So in this schematic, they're showing sensory receptors in the skin. Sensory receptors in the skin, for the most part, tend to be part of somatic reflexes. Some will participate in autonomic reflexes like sweating, right, to detect temperature. But most of them are somatic. They could have easily shown eyes as sensory receptors, nose, your tongue, those are equal sensory receptors. Sensory receptors in your stomach detecting stretch in your stomach, whether or not you've got food in your stomach or not. Right? So there's lots of different kinds of sensory receptors. All sensory neurons are going to come in the back door, right? And then you see all kinds of pathways they can go. One of those pathways is to eventually connect up with this motor neuron, telling skeletal muscle to contract. That's a somatic circuit. That's a somatic reflex. These sensory neurons can come in, they can synapse with interneurons or not, and they can head on to our autonomic nervous system circuitry, in which case their effectors are different. Here I have cardiac muscle, smooth muscle in the bladder, and glands. I want to show you a little schematic of the basic differences between the somatic and the autonomic, because it can get kind of confusing with all these wires going everywhere. In the somatic nervous system, I'm just going to jump up some white space here. This is my sensory